Good afternoon, good evening, good afternoon, good midday, wherever it may be. And today we're going to be doing a lecture on Ant and Scott, which are actor network theory, social construction of technology, with a focus on Life360, generative AI, and autonomous vehicles, and gender and sex, if you will. Right. So what we're going to be focusing on today is this. So buckle in, all right, folks. Welcome to the kind of lecture where we ask, why does your mom still think Life360 is just a quote unquote safety app and not a surveillance tool disguised as quote unquote love, right? Why do AI voices default to sounding male, confident, and just a little condescending? Why are autonomous vehicles still crashing gender assumptions? Or more curiously, why do most virtual assistants sound like women until they're giving you financial advice or directions and suddenly have a deep male voice that screams authority? It's not random and it's not neutral. So we're going to be covering this today. So let's get into it, shall we? So as mentioned, today we are going to take a look at the two foundational frameworks in this class. That is the social construction of technology, which is called SCOT, and actor network theory, which is called ANT, and walk them through the wild, glitchy playground of contemporary tech. I'm talking apps that let parents track every move you make, AI tools that reinforce gender binaries, even when as they pretend to be smart, and autonomous cars designed with Chad in mind, but not Cheryl. And even those names, why did I pick those? Buckle up. We'll also call in Foucault's concept of biopower, which you'll be reading for 2 weeks, actually, at some point in this course, to make sure that you've had time to kind of decompress and deconstruct and also consume it, and how technologies regulate and manage life. And Winner's classic argument that even a bridge can be political depending on what it's leading to and who it's keeping from. Yes, a bridge. Don't worry, we'll get to that. So let's start with Life360. This app is perfect. This app's the perfect gateway drug for SCOT analysis. On paper, it's a tool, right? Just a little location sharing app. But Scott says technologies don't have a fixed meaning. Instead, their interpretation depends on the social group using them. So if you're a teenager, Life360 probably feels like digital surveillance. Big mom is watching. Big dad is watching, right? But to parents, it's peace of mind, right? It's a parenting tool for the anxiety age. Scott pushes us to ask what different social groups exist in relation to a technology. What are their values, concerns, expectations? And crucially, who gets to decide what app and what the app means in practice? Whose interpretation wins out? And what are the power dynamics embedded within that? So this is what we're going to kind of look at today. Now, from that, Langdon Weiner would walk in here when I'm writing lecture right now and say, wait, let's go one step further. Technologies don't get interpreted differently. Sometimes they employ politics. Winner's famous example, Robert Moses, this New York City planner who allegedly built low overpasses on Long Island parkways so that buses, often used by working class black and brown New Yorkers, couldn't pass through to the beaches. It's debatable whether the specific example holds water historically, but the broader point stands. The built environment can enforce segregation, exclusion, and control. Now, plug that back into Life360. Is it just an app? Or is it an artifact reinforcing a particular kind of family structure? Heteronormative, hierarchical, and deeply gendered. Female teens especially get extra monitoring. Why? Because we've normalized the idea that they're more at risk, when really the narrative can function as a mechanism of control. Famously in masculinity studies, men are defined by protector and predator. But I want you to ask yourself a question right now. This could be a conversation about how we perceive reality. I teach men in masculinity, and men are taught that we are protectors and that we are predators. But I ask you a really important question. Who are we protectors from? If you're in a world with actor network theory like World of Warcraft, it's orcs and chimeras and the undead and all of this. But in the reality world we live in, more often than not, men are being protected to protect women from other men. Why couldn't we flip the script and start socializing a world where women aren't needing Life360 for fear that predator needs to be attacked with the predator-protector dynamic? Something to think about. So going from here, we also have the conversation of actor network theory, right? ANT for short. If Scott zooms out to look at interpretive communities, right? Ant zooms in to show how technologies act as part of a web of relations. According to Ant, Life360 isn't just code on your phone. It's satellites, smartphones, anxious parents, user data, school schedules, curfews, moral panics, push notifications, all working together. It's not just a tool you use. It participates in shaping behavior. When a mom texts, "Why were you at Sarah's house at 9:42 p.m.?" It's not just mom asking. It's the app, the phone, the data history, all teaming up to discipline and structure your behavior. This is where we see Foucault's concept of microphysics of power show up. Power isn't always top-down. It operates in these small everyday moments. Life360 becomes not just an app, but a disciplinary force shaping how you move, where you go, and even what you don't do. Right? So Life360's meaning depends on who's using it and why. Generative AI defaults are shaped by elite Western developer norms. If you know psychology, then you know weird statistics. Take a look at that if you don't know it, right? It's an acronym. I generated this image that we're looking at, and I just told it to make a woman looking at Life360 with a cup of hot coffee with steam coming off of it. Why did it pick a white woman? Why did it pick an anglicized name like Jessica for the daughter? Why did it pick Sheffield? Why did it have her only 5 minutes checking in on only 5 minutes ago? Why was this image the way it looks when I didn't give it any standards of norm? Why did it default to these narratives? Autonomous vehicles are designed for imagined users with embedded biases, as we'll learn about, and technologies are never neutral. They carry the values of their makers, as we've been discussing. So if we look into this kind of construction of how we're seeing it, we're going to shift a little bit to that generative AI conversation, right? And again, this slide right here is reinforcing what we just talked about, and I'm going to leave this up for a bit before I go to the next slide. But on to generative AI, if you asked ChatGPT to write a CEO speech, it's likely to sound like a dude named Chad who just finished reading The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Why? Scott would argue that it's not about the tech being neutral. It's about who designed it, what assumptions they had, what social world shaped the training data. The people designing these tools come from a particular background, often male, often white, often middle class or upper class, and they are baked into these types of situations, those biases right into their system. There's a famous concept known as dominant linguistic ideology. And it's used a lot in masculinity studies. But if I ask you to name sexual orientation, you'd likely probably most commonly name everything but heterosexual, but that's still a sexual preference, right? If I asked you to name race and ethnicity, it's likely you leave out Anglo-Saxon white, right? You would likely leave that out. And the reason is that it goes unknown, but it doesn't go unpowered, right? It's that we focus on a lot of other groups, leaving those in power kind of not checked. And this is where you start seeing this, right? That these things can be baked right into the system. It's really powerful to think about. So Ant here helps us understand that AI isn't just a tool. It's an actor network of code, data sets, engineers, companies, users, and cultural assumptions. These systems don't just process information, they make decisions. They categorize people, they gatekeep who gets hired, who gets flagged by predictive policing, and even those who face get recognized, right? Foucault would call this a new kind of surveillance, an algorithmic gaze, one that doesn't just observe it, but interprets and disciplines. And if you're queer, disabled, non-binary, or racially marginalized, the system often fails to see you clearly, or worse, sees you as a problem. And I encourage you to, we'll be watching Black Mirror in this episode, and Nosedive is a great example of this. What if we went to a total social score? This exists and was going to be put into place in China prior to 2020. I haven't followed up to see if it was, but this idea of a social score would massively impact, and who would dictate the rules? So let's continue this conversation of generative AI, shall we? It gets deeper. The AI systems aren't just being used to write essays or generative memes, as one would see. They're embedding in the hiring platforms, in judicial systems that use predictive analytics to recommend sentencing, in educational tools that determine learning readiness. So when we say this AI as biopower, we mean it. These tools aren't just reflecting biases. They're reinforcing and automating inequality under the guise of optimization. What do they say? Innovation, you need to break in a couple eggs to make an omelet. Whose eggs are we breaking, right? So this is where we think back to my earlier image. It reflects an assumption I made about a woman monitoring her child on Life360, assumption shaped by my own implicit biases within my writing and how I write or speak that made the generative AI assume that I wanted it to be what, a white woman with an anglicized daughter's name? I dare you also to ask ChatGPT to write a summary of you, no matter how much you're using it. See whom it thinks you are, right? Constantly, you may see a default outputs often reflect white male corporate norms. Biopower operates through the algorithmic gaze, sorting and disciplining users. Marginalized identities, as I was just talking about, are underrepresented or misrepresented inside this data set. AI tools aren't objective, they reinforce dominant ideologies under the surface. So, how many times nowadays, something to think about? Everyone knows about the M dash, right? This is the big Trojan horse, right? But how many times have you spotted the M dash in these slides? Shift Command Dash makes an M dash, and if you understand how to use it inside grammar, it's a very effective tool. But did you start wondering if this was a generatively based lecture, that I built everything from it, or is it something that is a tool that can be used? Now that I said it, what are you thinking now? And so I generated this image for you, right? I just asked it to do a standard thing of looking at this. And it kind of is a summary that's looking at what we're talking about. If it was to constantly make observations, and let's say you were this woman of color, and all of the summary sounded more like you were an anglicized white individual, male corporate interests in North American, and let's say you're a woman of color, constantly we see more default outputs often reflect white male corporate norms. Is this the story of the person that we're looking at on this image? Does that even feel accurate? Does that even feel like it would be there? What if we were able to see it more clearly like pictures like this, right? And so I want to move on a little bit here, though, right? That it gets deeper. The AI systems aren't just being used to write these essays and stuff like I mentioned. So if we're onto the open road, autonomous vehicles, Ant says that self-driving cars is not just a car. It's a rolling assemblage of software, sensors, infrastructure, traffic laws, engineering assumptions, social expectations. If a car brakes at a crosswalk, it's not a moment of decision. It's a cascade of code, algorithmic, environmental conditions, and ethics of who gets protected in this collision scenario, right? We've had some instances of people saying, like, what happens if Waymo hits somebody? What does? Who's in trouble? The passenger or the company? Take time to think about that. And this is where SCOT steps back in. Who is the imagined user of the self-driving car? Who is constantly being tested about safety protocols, right? More often than not, it's the archetypical male driver, rational, assertive, alert, making the assumption that all those are male traits to begin with. And that's a bigger assumption as it is. But female STS scholars, right, when we're looking at this larger component of how we see all of these dynamics of the world around us, and we see these connections and assumptions and biases and basis. When we look at these female STS or science and technology studies theorists or scholars, what we're also seeing is that there are those questioning how we're building these types of structures. They challenge that. Crash test dummies designed around the average male body. So the physical size, the length, the strength, the height, they're not taking into considerations the standards of norms of the female body. That resulted in decades of increased injury and risks for women in real crashes. So if our design assumptions already treat male bodies and behaviors as the default, what happens when we automate that? It's going to be based on literature. What bodies and identities are left out of the safety equation? What voices and experiences weren't in the room when this tech was built? And that's questions you need to ask about designing with inclusion. So when we're having these kind of conversations, Foucault will remind us this is about governing bodies in motion. Surveillance doesn't always look at the cameras on the wall. It can be embedded in things like software code, design parameters, or even shape of a seatbelt. Biopower is just about telling people what to do, right? It isn't just about telling people what to do. It's about shaping what's possible in everyday lives. So to ask, if technology protects some bodies better than others, is protecting or is it prioritizing? To this day, 2025 plus, right, we still see that there is an increased over 280% more likelihood of mortality during childbearing process for Black women because of the old idea of eugenics and the assumption falsely taught about race as a fact that led to Black women and women of color specifically being given less pain medication or the wrong treatment, or what a bruise looks like on a black and brown body compared to a white body. We start seeing how this impacts our medicine, right? So what do we take from all of this? Right? We have this idea that vehicle safety often tested on male body standards. Design choice favors assertiveness over caution or flexibility. These scholars of feminism critique how we show who's prioritized for safety and who gets imagined as a typical driver. One cool thing I got to learn in one of my classes when students brought up the conversation, and on the Sociology Cat, my Instagram account, I have post about this if you're interested, but women more commonly see Waymo as safe compared to men who find power taken away from them and don't like doing it. The reason is that how often, especially men in this class, are you annoyed at the driver playing you a mixtape or just not being a great driver? You're not wondering about, do they know where you live? Are they going to stop this vehicle? Are they creepy? Are they giving off kind of like SA vibes? Women have to think about that all the time. Waymo no longer has that factor, that actor who's driving the vehicle. Men worry about having control. Women worry about this construction of the safety parameters. So for many of my students, they said they would take Waymo 9 times out of 10 because a crash was the least of their concern. And the men in my class had not ever thought about that. So this idea of this Foucauldian structure, we first understand technology in isolation. And SCOT gives us the tools to analyze both how and the why behind tech. And shows us close up the tangled, complex networks of human and non-human actors. SCOT lets us pull back and examine how different groups contest the meaning and the purpose of a tool. Together, they help us see that nothing about tech is net neutral. It's all shaped by people, institutions, and power. Foucault gives us the language about biopower, tech not as a tool, but as a system for managing life, shaping behaviors, and organizing bodies in space. Weiner reminds us that not even inanimate objects like bridges can enforce politics. If the bridges only let some people across, then it's not concrete, it's ideology in steel form. When we add gender and sex to the mix, the question gets sharper. Who is seen? Who is heard? Who gets the norm? And who is treated as an edge case, right? From Life360 parental gaze to AI algorithmic bias, autonomous vehicles built for the default bodies, we see technology acting as a system of inclusion and exclusion. That's why this course matters. Technology isn't just a product, it's a process. It isn't just a tool, it's a teacher, a governor, a mirror. It's shaping us more than we shape it. So our job as sociologists is to ask the uncomfortable questions. Who designed this? For whom? And who got left behind? If you're not questioning the tech, odds are it's already questioning you. And I want to add a little caveat quickly here. Think about the impact that generative AI is already having on education. Many of us are reading all these articles, right? 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 users per the new recent data, the way that it's warping or hurting our minds, all these things are showing. But I also ask the question, in how many generations is it going to be that this tool may become something that disables, not enables? How often are we going to revert in the academic side, which is already happening, to going back to writing by hand? How many of you have now had legibility tests in writing classes, or have you not? And who are we disabling by going back to away from the tools that were made to help with people with like dyslexia for spelling and organization and grammar, by it reverting away from having it be digital? Who are we hurting by making it no longer able to submit things when you're at home? You have to be in person. How are we taking steps back with the same tech that's supposed to help? Or even, like I mentioned earlier, strictly by people who know how to use an M-dash because it was seen as a good tool by the generative AI analysis on what they deemed as good writing. Now we're being accused of being fraudulent because we found that 1 in 3 users are using it. How about how many people who speak English as their third or fourth language using tools such as Google Translate that will then trigger any of these tools to have some suspicion of generative AI? Are we impacting those folk who are using this as a way to get to college where they have made the standard of norm papers in English, even though that's not their spoken language of preference? These are things you need to ask about actor network and social construction of technology. A fun one for you, electric vehicles don't actually have to have a noise when they go in reverse. Their engine makes no noise. So they added that beep because some elderly folks ended up getting hit because they were used to cars having noise. Social construction of technology, actor network theory. All right, class, that's enough from me. I'm going to wrap this up. If this lecture has taught us anything, hopefully, it's that your apps are watching you. Your AI is judging you, and your car is silently asking, do you even drive? We've seen how SCOT reminds us the meaning is always under negotiation, kind of like a group project, but with your parents, and how Ant reminds us that tech, or actor network theory, is never alone. It's co-constructed, deeply relational, and absolutely codependent. It is just completely codependent on us, right? So I want to leave you with these thoughts. Please read the slide. I'll clear that in a second. But from Life360's panoptic parenting to AI's bias-fueled outputs to autonomous vehicles that assume you're a 6'1" guy named Chad who works in finance, I guess. Every artifact is sociological text, material and non-material culture. Our job? Read it, decode it, and maybe, if we're lucky, reprogram it. So that's the end of our little techno-social syntax party, where biopower conjugates control, AI determines nuances, and Life360 inflects overprotection in your daily lives. I will see you next time, where we'll keep parsing society's code, one app one-hour effect, and an awkwardly gendered chatbot at a time, and a very fast-talking professor at that. I leave you with what's on this last slide. You should search IG Reels, TikToks, or YouTube Shorts and see the fun videos of children flipping the script on their parents, watching them and saying, hey, I see you're by Baskin Robbins or Dunkin' Donuts. Can you mind getting me a sweet treat? And with that, I thank you for your time. I'll see you in the next one.